So earlier this year, you invested in Stripe, joined the board.
I did not join the
You
board.
did not join the
invested.
board. And I think folks had fun on Twitter with you because a while ago, someone surfaced up your tweet that said, you didn't believe in Stripe or something like that. So walk us through how you went from maybe a feeling of disbelief to belief. Clearly, the management team at Stripe is awesome. But walk us through as an investor how you went from that, and you have deep payments experience, obviously, how you went about that decision.
Sure. So it was a very expensive mistake. I saw Stripe back in 2010 when there was, I believe, just the 3 founders.
Oh, boy.
I wish we could revisit that decision, but you can't be perfect in this business. In fact, my mother, actually, of all things, pointed out to me how successful Stripe was going to be, and I can't even go home.
The ultimate LP.
I get reminded by my mother all of the time about the Stripe mistake. So the Twitter fiasco was pretty easy to deal with vis-a-vis that. But I think there were some things that changed in the world. First of all, the original vision of Stripe was predicated on really displacing PayPal on the web with a simpler, more intuitive, developer-friendly set of APIs. And I wasn't quite convinced at all, actually, that you could just substitute away from PayPal based upon those principles and that you would unlock, therefore, a whole new form of commerce. What I have been convinced of is that mobile has created a whole new platform and that PayPal had no traction, no pre-existing installed base, that you had to rip people out and switch, which is very, very difficult in any business, let alone payments. So, for example, Uber, Lyft, all of these have created all the on-demand, Instacart, DoorDash, all these companies are creating new commerce where somebody needs to power this, and all these companies are revisiting their decisions because they're all new from scratch. And so there's this massive market opportunity that I don't think anybody really recognized. Actually, Uber hadn't even launched yet when I met with the team originally. Oh, wow. Secondly, obviously you get to know people, and a lot of this business is backing the right entrepreneurs. There's companies that if Elon launches are fundable, and if anybody else on the planet tried, would not be fundable. So, over time, I've got to know, Patrick and John fairly well, and they're obviously incredibly talented, as you pointed out, and they have a very strong vision of what they're trying to accomplish. And so, as I've got to know them personally, it made it a lot easier to invest in the company. Where when I met with them the first time, it was an hour coffee from scratch, having no context, and it's a harder decision to make.
And do you think, just a couple questions on that, like aside from Stripe, I think sometimes investors, when they say no early or they feel like the door is closed, an entrepreneur says, might feel slighted or something, whatever in the passion of the moment. How do you go back and rebuild those relationships? I'm not suggesting that this one was broken, but I'm sure that happens from time to time, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, remember, when you're an entrepreneur, it's your baby. And effectively, when you say no to someone when they're presenting their baby to you to invest, you're kind of calling their baby ugly. And obviously that's an emotional decision, and not everybody can separate the emotion from the rationality. But actually a couple of points. One, actually I didn't even know this. Patrick told me about 4 years later. After that meeting, I helped set them up to meet with Wells Fargo, who did the processing for them originally. And I'd had a long history with Wells Fargo. I had switched PayPal to Wells Fargo, helped Zoom start on Wells Fargo. So it made Wells Fargo a lot of money in the financial services space. And generally, they don't like to work with early stage entrepreneurs. So I didn't even know, but my introduction helped them get off the ground. So I tried to help the company and help the entrepreneurs. Second thing is, when you realize a mistake, the best thing to do is to admit that you made a mistake. I did this with Daniel Gross fairly conspicuously. So he pitched me on Greplin. And I really disliked it for a variety of reasons. And when I met with him, I walked him through all the reasons I didn't like the business. 3 months later, he sent me an email saying, hey, I've taken some of your feedback. I've changed some of these things. I added a co-founder, blah, blah, blah. Would you like to have coffee? And I said, sure. And so I sat down with him. He told me all the things he changed. And it's very rare to see an entrepreneur make material changes within 3 months. I said, you know what? I've made a mistake. I should have invested. Let's just do this. Double your cap on your last note, and I'll invest. And so I wound up investing. They sold the company to Apple about 6 months ago. Fairly successful exit for the team and for the investors. But it was because I made the mistake and I felt guilty for making the mistake. I just voluntarily offered to double the valuation of the company, which fortunately for him, a lot of other people agreed with. A lot of people followed me, so it worked out really well for the company. But so being aware of your mistakes and being willing to correct them is part of the art too.
And second tangent on this, so going back to payments, just be curious about what you think Facebook could do in payments. So I see a lot of people who are not in the tech world and checking out all these apps, when you're in restaurants or in these places, especially restaurants, they are looking at Facebook. Facebook knows you're at so-and-so restaurant in San Francisco. I got to think at some point they want to be able to close that loop. Well, one, do you think they care about closing that loop? And if they don't, I'm sorry, if they do, how would they go about doing
Sure. So they absolutely care about closing the loop. Okay. Anybody who's in the advertising business wants to close the loop. It's why Google keeps making these forays, sort of half-assed forays into payments, and Google Wallet is they're an advertising business. They need to prove the efficacy of their advertising. And the truth is their advertising is probably more effective than they get credit for. So they can only track the direct conversions on the web, where in fact it probably influences behavior and purchase decisions all throughout the real world. And they've been always trying to find different ways to do it. Payments is only one way to do that. It is a pretty expensive way to do it, meaning like the time, energy, effort, the dynamics to be successful with payments and having consumers adopt a new payment sort of technique. There may be better ways, paths of least resistance. Facebook was in the payments game for a while. They had a really good team. They'd borrowed a lot of my former colleagues from PayPal, kind of junior colleagues, and recruited them. And so they had some good DNA, but then they pivoted, and I think Mark's talked about this publicly, into building effectively a social gaming payments platform, which is different than a general purpose payments platform. And so they kind of, if they want to do payments, have to go back to the drawing board, rebuild everything from scratch. And then it's a question of prioritization. How good is that idea versus 5 other things they could do?
I mean, part of the reason I'm asking this too is because I think Cover Pay, or I don't know the exact name, I apologize, came out of beta or launched from New York and here, and it makes a ton of sense. I mean, you got to expect that's going to happen.
I think it's unclear though what the driver. So all of these digital wallet, digital pay, sort of products and apps haven't resonated at scale with any consumer. Nowhere in the United States. Can someone figure out a formula? Absolutely yes. But I think the value proposition is going to have to be different. It's like any other consumer product. You need a 10x improvement. And swiping a credit card isn't that bad. Like, pulling a card out of your wallet, it's pretty convenient. It's with Square, it's universally accepted these days. If you use the product correctly as a consumer, it can be free with a 30-day float. So it's got a pretty good set of value propositions. So to reorient that behavior directly and completely in areas where credit cards work and debit cards work takes an order of magnitude breakthrough. And that's where I think most people have failed, is the order of magnitude innovation isn't there. Maybe a 2x, but that's not good enough.